When building out workflows in Nintex workflow, sometimes you're going to have to go and get information from other areas, such as extensibility to third-party systems, and sometimes you actually have to use actions within your SharePoint tenant that are available to you, but we don't have a native action built into Nintex workflow for you to accomplish that. So like maybe, for example, I want to go and grab all the lists within a site within my SharePoint environment. And there are a couple of actions that you can use to do that, but the one that we're going to focus on right now is going to be an action called HTTP web service. So call HTTP web service. And so this action, in and of itself, what it will do is it will execute a web service call within your SharePoint tenant. So if I'm going to make a call, it's going to execute under the credentials in which this workflow is published. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to enter the address to go and get the lists within the SharePoint site. So how do we even find this information? Where would I even find the call that I'm trying to make? Well, Microsoft has documentation at docs.microsoft.com, and you can go and go down to the SharePoint APIs and the SharePoint REST service calls that you're going to be making. And so I've brought up one already for working with lists and list items with REST, and this is what we're interested in working with. And so we're not going to actually look for an individual list ID. We're just going to go and grab all of them. And what I particularly want is I want the first one to show up, and I want to capture that. But what we're going to see here is kind of the structure of the call we're going to make. It's going to call this URL, and so it's an HTTP call to the site URL itself, and then after that site URL, it's going to be underscore API /web /lists, and then we'll leave it at that because we're not going to actually put the GUID for the individual list that we need to capture. We'll notice that it is a get call and that we can pass headers, and we should pass headers on this one. If this was made outside of our SharePoint tenant, we'd have to place the authorization header in here with the bearer and then the access token that you can go through SharePoint's documentation to find out how to actually get that access token. But what we do want to include in this header is the accept parameter to go and say, let's get application JSON. And why application JSON? Well, application JSON, we want to get the JSON data from this call because we're going to store it in a variable. And the variable that you're going to store that information in when using Nintex workflow for O365 and the call HTTP web service action is a dictionary. And so a dictionary is a collection of key and values. And we're actually going to build out the header right now for the accept application JSON. So you can see that we've got the action over here, and we know the address that we're going to go and grab. So how do we go and fill in this address? Well, first off, we make it really easy by giving you some contextual information. And so under workflow context, if you clicked in that field, you'd see insert reference pane show up on the right of the action config. And what you want to use is the current site URL. So if you double click on that, that's going to bring up this token, and that's going to be the site URL that you're going to work with. And so then you can actually do your / and then you can do underscore API web and then lists. And I believe that's what it is. We'll take one more look over here. Yep, underscore API web and lists. And so we'll leave it at that. Great, now we have that. We know that it's a request type get, and you can do other requests. So say I wanted to actually create a list, and maybe that's a post. So you can do that within here, but what we want to do is grab the list. So we'll just use the get type call for the request type out of these. Next, we need to go and add a header. So how do we go and create one of these? I'll just go ahead and save this. You can see it's unconfigured because we are missing some information in there. And we need to go and create a header, and that's going to be a dictionary itself. So what we would do then is go and grab one of the dictionary actions, and this one's going to be build a dictionary. So what we can do is type in dictionary real fast in the actions pane, and you'll see we've got build a dictionary, count items in a dictionary, get an item from a dictionary. And what we're going to do is we're going to build this one out. And so if I go here and I click on build dictionary, we'll go and add a key, and we'll determine the data type that it is and then place the value within it. And then we would store the output of this in a workflow variable, which will more often than not be the dictionary you're working with, but we haven't created one yet. So what we would have to do here is click on add, and then instead of key 1, we want this to be called accept, right? Because we're saying accept this type. And the type that we're looking at here is going to be text. And then what you can type here is application headers/JSON. And that's it. That's all you have to do for the items over here. But we need to store this in an output. So I've already created some content before in this, and I've created the request headers and another dictionary for the response content. But what you would do is you would then store that in the appropriate dictionary. So if I needed to create a new one, I'll just go and click on create, and then it will by default determine that it is a dictionary type output. So you notice that it doesn't even give you the ability to select a data type for the output of the variable. So then you would just give it a name and then click on create, and it would populate that here. I've already gone ahead and done that and placed that within the workflow that I'm creating for you. So we'll go and click OK right there. So I've got my dictionary built out, and if we double click in there, you'll see that it's got accept and text and application JSON, and we have the output of this dictionary stored in a variable called rec headers. And so why rec headers? Well, you can use whatever naming convention you want, but what I'm using in this is REQ for request and then headers. And so now that we've got that built out, what we would do is go over to a call HTTP web service action over here, and under request headers, click the drop down to select the appropriate variable we want to use, or if we had to create a new one, create a new one. But what I want to do is use request headers. So we've got that in there. All right, fantastic. Now, some calls, some HTTP web service calls require you to supply a body, a structured body for how you actually are going to send information. Maybe there's additional parameters you need to provide that are not in the query string, but they're in the body of the actual call. And if you're going to do that, you're going to place another dictionary right here within the request content of how you would structure that out. Luckily for us, we don't need to do that right now. Next, you're going to see where we've got response content. So what's the difference between response and request? Well, request is saying, hey, I'm going to request from the server to do this. The response is what that server comes back to you with. And so that's why you'd have another dictionary variable built out to hold that. So you can just go ahead and create one for the response content. So I gave this variable a naming convention of RESP content, so response content, so we know the purpose of this dictionary. So you go ahead and click that. The last bit here is if you needed to store the response headers, you can do that for whatever purpose you may need it for. And then also collecting the status code. And it's good to collect the status code if you want to do some error handling within your workflows. Depending on the status code that's provided, you can actually progress within the workflow or reroute it down another path if you get a status code in which you are unable to access the web service call or it's down for some reason. And so in that, you would actually store it within a text call. So we've got another variable that I created called RESP code. And so you can just store that one in there. And so then that's your action all collected. So that's great. So we've made our call. We've got this. So I don't even know how to get that content. I don't know what to do with that content. So how would I actually work with this? Well, after you've made this web service call, and to be honest, what you should be doing is building your dictionary for your headers before you ever make the call. So make sure that that's above your HTTP web service. But after you've done that, well, you need to get that value. You need to do something with it. So how do you do that thing with it? Well, you need to take a look first at what's the response and what does that look like? Well, one way to do that, to take a look at the dictionary variable that's returned to you so you can get a better idea of how to navigate through that to get the value you want, is to actually send that value to yourself. Now, normally when working within workflows, you'll use the log to history list action to capture that value. Well, because these values are so long, they'll get truncated in that return for the log to history list because there's only so much content or so many characters that can be stored within that. How do you go around that? Well, you'll send an email to yourself on that. So what you can do is choose to send an email and go ahead and say send an email, double click on that, put the two individuals, send an email subject of, JSON response content. And then within the body, once you click on the input field over there, click on workflow variables, and you'll see the response content dictionary here. So double click on that, and then that will be sent to you. And so you would go and just kick off a test version of this workflow, making that response call, and you'll see that. And so you'll be able to see what that actual data is. Now, what I do in your email is copy it from your email, and then go ahead and place that within Notepad to remove any formatting from it. And then from Notepad, place it in the text editor of your choice. And so the text editor that I always use is Visual Studio Code. So I placed it within Visual Studio Code. It should automatically predict that the type is JSON. So now you can see the structure that's returned. So this is the response that's provided back to us. And what it is it's an object in JSON that's sent back to us. And we'll see that we've got this value array, and value here denoted by an array because we've got this bracket right here with a whole bunch of data within each item. And so if I go and click on this, the opening of the first value within the array, and scroll on down a little bit, I'll see that it ends here. So we've got a whole bunch of contextual information for the first list return value to it. But then at the very end, I see we've got attendees as a title, and that's what I want to grab. I want to grab that name attendees. So how do I go and do that? Well, let's go ahead and drag this guy down. And what we'll see now after doing the send email action is I'll delete that. And I'm going to bring open this get item from dictionary action. And so if I double click on that, you're actually going to have to fill in some information. First off, it's going to say, what dictionary do you want to grab information from? And so under the drop down here, you say, well, the response one. And so you just click on the appropriate dictionary. Next, what you need to do is you need to determine the item name or path for it. And our response was a web service call made within our SharePoint environment. And so what we're going to do is use a syntax that's going to allow us to traverse the nodes of what's returned. So if you know XPath, this shouldn't be too crazy if we're getting it down. But we know that arrays are zero-based indexes. And so it's always going to start at 0. The first value we want starts at 0. And so if we take a look again at the JSON that's returned here, what you'll see is that it starts in an array called value. So we need to denote go into value. And then from there, what I want to say is within this value array, grab me the first item. So what you can see from that curly bracket all the way down to that curly bracket. And then the one key that we need to find here is the one called title. And so title is that. And so give me the value for title, which is going to be attendees. And so if I bring this back down and take a look at how I structured this, we say, give me the array value, and then we do a / to denote, let's go and take a look at the next thing here, which is going to be the index value. And so to denote in this syntax the index value you want, it's got to be surrounded by parentheses. So if I wanted to grab the second item within here, all I'd have to do is go and just make that a 1. But because I'm looking for the first, I'll make that a 0. And then we'll do another / and then we'll say, give me title. And so that's the path that this query will traverse down to get me the value I want. And so where do we store that value? Well, I created another text variable called text get item, and you can use whatever naming convention you want, but I use text get item, and then I'll just store it in that. And so then that gives us that information. And so then after that, what you can do is do what you need to do with that action or with that content that you have. So what I used is a logged history list to go and capture that actual information. And so that's how you can use the call HTTP web service with the dictionary actions that are supplied within Nintex workflow to go and build the headers or any of the other additional components that are required for the call HTTP web service action.